Welcome to the Josh Huisman Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to the podcast. I hope you are having a great day. And if you have not been having a good day, I can promise you right now that's about to change, because I have a guest here with me today that I have been super excited to talk to. He is someone that I've gotten to know a little bit over the last couple of years. And I will tell you what, if you were to go back and tell me as a younger guy that you and I would have a friendship and have times when we get together and talk, I'm telling you, it would have blown my mind. And so I got Gordon Kennedy here in the studio, and I cannot tell you enough good things about him. And we're going to get to it, because we got for the next 45 minutes to an hour.
My time is your time.
And that is great that you would say that, because I have found over the last couple of years, just getting to know you, how authentic you are and real. And I appreciate your generosity.
Well, thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, it really is a blessing to me. And I want to read a scripture to kind of get us started, because as I kind of give that intro and say, hey, how's your day going? How's everyone doing out there? And if you're not doing well, that's going to change right now, because today's scripture that I want to open with is Psalm 37, verse 23. The steps of a man are established by the Lord when he delights in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be cast headlong, for the Lord upholds his hand. And I wanted to share this scripture because I've heard you talk on some things that I think you can really bring some things to life in that scripture. And you don't know yet what I'm talking about, but we're going to get there.
Okay.
But then even for me saying, as a young man, I remember my older brother coming home from a concert one time that you were playing in. I didn't know you at the time. All I knew was a tape was handed to me, and it was you playing guitar on that record. And all you were to me at that point was a guy who was writing songs and you were playing guitar and you were singing. You were part of this band called Whiteheart at the time. And you didn't know who I was, but you were changing my life. God was using you to change my life. And now,
wonderful to hear.
Here we sit, and we've talked with each other. We've hung out on a couple of occasions, and I go, oh my goodness, like I can text you and say, hey, how you doing? Everything going well?
We did a concert together.
Yes, and it has blown my mind. And I recently heard you on another podcast talk about how you told a story about dominoes and dominoes in your life, and how you see how God works and moves in dominoes in your life. And that's why I wanted to read that scripture. A man's steps are ordered by the Lord.
Yeah.
What comes to mind when I
used the dominoes thing from time to time because it's a visual that people can relate to, and I go back to watching The Tonight Show. There was a couple of times back in the 70s even that, and Johnny Carson was the host. He would have this guy on that would spend I remember them saying 12 or 14 hours or something setting up these dominoes, this real intricate pattern, and some ramps and some hoops of fire or whatever it was. And then on the show, after they would introduce this guy, he would just tip the first domino. And then for the next couple of minutes or so, it was doing these patterns and traveling, in loops, and this knocks this over and rolls this ball down. I mean, all these different things. So you just watched these dominoes. And so I think, in recent years, I came to start thinking about my life as being such that, if you were to look over your shoulder, if I look over my shoulder, there are the dominoes. They're all standing up back there. And if I were to reach back there and pull one, it might have a name of a person or an event, a date or something. And one that I might use as an example would be the name Carter Brown, who was my 5th and 6th grade football coach. But I can show you that if that isn't there, I'm not married to, I'm married to. I didn't go to the high school I went to. I wouldn't have met Tommy Sims. There wouldn't have been an Eric Clapton song. I can start just everything. I wouldn't have been in Whiteheart. On and on and on, just because
from
of that,
one guy?
From the one name. Because me and my two brothers, Brian and Shelby, all played football for him when we were at Percy Priest grade school. It was Grade Y football, YMCA league. And he was the guy that went over and told the new head football coach at a new high school in Brentwood, the Kennedy family's got 3 football players, in the family. So we would see a slideshow for the school, and that would be the high school I went to where I met Dan Huff. He was the first guitar player in Whiteheart, and he and I went to high school together, and we were in a group together, and pushed each other, him more me, I'm sure, on the guitar, even though my father was a guitar player. But Dan was the guy that was a peer of mine that made me realize, wait, here's the benchmark where I should be right now. And just trying to keep up with him, I had to, to keep honing that craft. So if I hadn't gone to that school, I wouldn't have met him. If I hadn't met Dan, then I wouldn't have been asked in the summer of '84, hey, can you sub for me for 3 shows in this group Whiteheart that I'm in, because he wanted to go do some sessions in L.A., and he never came back. He stayed out there for 5 years. So I stayed in the group for 6 years.
He never came back to the group.
No, he never came.
He
He didn't come back. He didn't come back to Nashville for 5 years. He just stayed out there. And now, I think back to, okay, the dominoes over his shoulder. What if he had never been asked to go to L.A.?
Yeah.
Or never had that in his mind to do that. What if when he asked me, I had said no, or had some reason that I couldn't have done it? How much of my life would change? Or if he had indeed come back after I did the 3 shows.
Yeah. You said something so good in there that is really important in leadership circles when it comes to, especially in my role as a pastor of a church, and the things that I do is you need people in your life who push you.
Oh, yeah.
People who you see, hey, they're setting a certain pace of how they're trying to accomplish things. And you said that with Dan Huff. He was kind of letting you know, hey, I'm going to need to get my act together, or whatever that looked like for you. And you need people in your life.
Surround yourself with the best. If it's up to you, get the best, because they'll lift you, cause you to have to rise to the occasion, which is certainly the case with Dan. Oh my gosh, he's a world-class guitarist, So just trying to keep up with him was good for me.
No, that is an awesome thing. And when I heard you talk about that dominoes, that brought that scripture to mind. And I'm curious. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to tell me, how does a football coach lead you to meeting your wife, or how?
That's the truth, because if I hadn't met Dan, I wouldn't have been in Whiteheart. If I hadn't been in Whiteheart, I wouldn't have been playing a concert on Halloween night, 1986 in South Bend, Indiana, and met my future wife and her whole family.
What was she doing? She was just going to the concert?
Her family went to church with our lead singer, Rick Florian's brother, Dan. And I think through Dan provided some tickets to their family. Hey, let's go see my brother who's singing lead for this group. She didn't even know who we were. In fact, she came home. She was at grad school in Kalamazoo, and I think drove home an hour to surprise them Friday night, and they were on their way out the door. So she could have missed them also. That's another thing. They had to convince her, drag her to come to the show because she didn't know who we were. Mm-hmm. And I think to appease her, maybe they gave her the front row ticket. So I saw her, from the stage first, and then there was a banquet after the show that Rick's family had put together, and there was a cake and a buffet and all this stuff, and her whole family were there. So I met the whole family.
So when you first you saw her first sitting out there? Did you start praying, Dream Wheeler? No, but I was wearing an Underdog T-shirt, and I found out at some point that she had been dating somebody for 4 years, and it ultimately didn't work out. Mm-hmm. But part of it not working out was our meeting too. It's just one of those things where, again, a near miss, but it was the first time I'd ever met anybody traveling that had, always was, conditioned to just kind of keep this blinder, Mm-hmm. We would go out to the record tables, sign posters and whatever after a show, and spend about an hour with people. And most of the times that we would do that, there would be a church involved. If we had done an altar call or an invitation that night, we wouldn't do it unless there was a church to follow up. And so there was always the presence of that. And I had
always determined that this is our time with you, this hour. We're on stage for 2 hours, and then we're at the tables for 30 minutes to an hour. That's our time with you. We leave.
Right.
So instead of just leaving you in the with dealing with our bus exhaust, there's a church there in place. So I was always conditioned to just like, after that, no. And nobody gets your phone number, and nobody, you don't want anybody to, we just never encourage anything like that. But when I saw her, I noticed her. I'm not lying. I noticed her. And then when we went to the banquet afterwards, and there she was again, still maybe trying to get my attention, right? And I noticed her again. Of course, I met her and her whole family and talked for a little while. And as they walked off into the sunset, I remember this twinge and ouch here. But then again, I get on the bus, and David Martin, who was opening the shows for us at the time, he's the guy that wrote "Let the Wind Blow" for the Imperials. So he was out doing the one-man show in front of us. He walked up on the bus, and again, David Martin, because he looks at me and he's grinning, and I said, "What?" He goes, "You need to marry that girl." And I said, I kind of laughed, and then like, yeah. He goes, "No, I'm serious. You need to marry that girl." And I looked at Rick. I said, "Well, what do you know about her?" "Well, then, I think my brother goes to church with her." And a month later, I called her. A month after that, we saw each other.
Yeah.
So, and back there, David Martin, if he doesn't walk up on the bus and say that one thing, I've put it out of my mind.
Yeah.
So it's a series of one steps, just to put the bow on the verse you just read. And I heard Ricky Skaggs say it in front of a group of students one time when a girl in the group said, "What should my 2-year plan, 5-year plan, 10-year plan look like?" He said, "I think maybe God wants us to think about what's the next one step to take. Pray about it, do your due diligence. And when you get a piece about that one step, take it. And then you know what you do after that? Same thing again."
Yeah.
So it's a series of one steps. And then as you get older and wiser, you can look back over your shoulder and go, I see where there was a plan, and there was an order of things that he knew about back then that I didn't. But you have to take these things and go somewhere.
That's so good, because a lot of times I think people in general, we want to hold life so tightly, and we want to plan every single thing out, and we think we've got the best thing in mind for our own lives. And if God would just let us take the reins, we could come up with the best plan there is. And often what happens is God's plan and God's ways are so much better. But if we are always the ones who are wanting to hold on to our own thing, so when I hear you say that in your story with your wife and a series of near misses, the truth of the matter is God had it the whole time.
Yeah, and a lot of times we don't learn that until we've been disappointed a lot. So sometimes there's this confusion about things. I was so sure that the song "Change the World" was something that the group that I was doing with Wayne Kirkpatrick, that we were going to get signed as artists, and that we were going to, that would be a song of ours. And then when it didn't happen, then Winona recorded it, and we were told it would be a single. And then at one point they said it was going to be a duet with her and Paul McCartney. And I'm this is unbelievable.
Yeah.
We watched all those things get put right in front of our face and vanish.
Yeah, and for anyone who's listening right now, if you've been living under a rock, Gordon wrote "Change the World," not a song called "Change the World," the "Change the World," the Eric Clapton
with
one,
Wayne and Tommy. And so, but we watched our goals and the plans and the things that we thought for sure were going to happen kind of just evaporate one after the other. And so you sit there and go, I could have sworn I prayed about, or I thought I saw this was going to be happening, and they told us it was going to happen, and all this stuff didn't happen. And then the thing that finally did happen was nothing we could have imagined. Nothing. So another, case study in, steps being ordered, and a lot of times it does involve some disappointment along the way, but you learn to, at some point, when something happens that's somewhat disappointing on the front end, to kind of go, well, I wonder what you're up to.
Yeah.
And I'll be patient,
And it's neat. And I think I can kind of hear where you're going a little bit, because I'd love to hear you tell the Grammy story about how your acceptance speech when you won for Song of the Year.
Yeah.
Because you you've been in music in the industry for so long, and you were part of Whiteheart, but you also wrote one of my absolute favorite PFR songs, That Kind of Love, that is such it's a gospel message. And there's some others we're going to talk about that just have this powerful message of who Jesus is. And you've talked on occasion about how you thought God was pulling you back into this world where you're going to share his message and give you a platform in the Christian music industry. And then this change the world thing happens.
And that was parallel. That was going on over here parallel to Sparrow Records, who the last album I did with Whiteheart was the Freedom album. And then there was a period of 5 years where I was out of the group doing session work, trying to write some songs and doing the thing with Wayne and see if we could get something going with that group. And being asked at one point, along with Jimmy Lee Sloas, at first it was, would you find somebody to produce to sort of fill the void after PFR had left the label? Mm. And then it was like, well, wait a minute, why don't you guys just do an album? And you don't have to tour and ride that gospel bus. I think they use that phrase, and just do the album. So it's like, okay, so what began as just answering the bell for our dear friend Peter York over at Sparrow Records kind of became this passion that fell on me like a ton of bricks. And all of a sudden I was having this conversation. You want me to do this again, do this kind of music again, share this message with people again. Mm-hmm. And so I poured my heart and soul into working on these songs and recording that album. And then when we saw the album released, it was sort of met with, it sounds too much like the Beatles, Eagles, James Gang, Pink Floyd, all these.
Is this the Dogs of Peace project?
The first album,
that you're talking about?
The first Dogs of Peace record, yeah. Mm-hmm. Speak is the name of the album. And so we were sort of politely shown the door by the industry and the magazine review that was critical of us, So I thought, well, gosh, a little confusing. I thought you wanted me to do this again. And meanwhile, over on this other side, Wayne and I had realized that we're not going to do this group together that was in the early 90s. And then our song Change the World had been placed on hold for Winona Judd. And Tony Brown was going to produce it. And one day he was being visited by a friend of his, Kathy Nelson, who's a music supervisor from Hollywood. And you'll see her name on a lot of Touchstone pictures, a lot of Jerry Bruckheimer, those blockbuster kind of movies, Con Air, Armageddon, and all that. Mm-hmm. Music supervision, Kathy Nelson. And he just said, one day, hey, listen to this song I'm going to record on Winona, and played her our demo. Well, Winona's record took 2.5 years to come out from the time that we were told. And from the time I went in and sang the background vocals on her version. And then 2.5 years later, and we've been standing around looking at our watches and being told we're going to have a single, which is, oh man, can't wait. This is going to be phenomenal. And then they put out 3 songs, one single after another, and then the third song, and we realized, and I saw Tony on Music Row one day, and he said, her label says they're not going to single the song. I don't know what to tell you. He said, I think they're crazy.
Wow.
So we were disappointed, to say the least. I had been disappointed about doing the Dogs of Peace record because I thought, you wanted me to do this message again. So I'm kind of thoroughly confused at this point in my life. I thought, I was so sure, Well, then a strange thing happened in the summer of 96. And I'm doing a session with Tommy Sims for Nicole Smith, and just casually he mentions to me on a break, we're getting another cut on this Change the World song. It's Eric Clapton. Well, I went back. First thing that went through my head was I had signed a deal with Doug Howard, who had come from the tape copy room when I was writing there for 6 years, when it was the Welk Music Group. Then it became Polygram. But he left a year before I did to go get a law degree in D.C. Well, I left a year after he left to go see what else is out there. So I do the group with Wayne. We do the Dogs of Peace record, everything. Well, Doug is coming back in the fall of 92. Where are you writing right now? Nowhere. Well, I want you over. I'm going to come back and run the company, how did that happen? So the guy who ran it worldwide was a guy from Australia named Colin Cornish, who said, go get your law degree. And then he had something special for Doug when he got finished. I want you to come run the Nashville office. He went from the tape copy room to running the Nashville office. Doug calls me and says, I want you back over at Polygram because I like what you do. He was the guy that would hear every song I wrote, even though nobody else in town would hear it. He heard every one of them because I like what you do. The first song I turned into him was Change the World. And he said, can you get this to Eric Clapton? We'll see what we can do. Well, that's not how it happened. It got placed with Winona, whose producer played it for Kathy Nelson, who at some point is casting music for this film called Phenomenon with John Travolta. What's that song I heard in Tony Brown's office? She set about trying to get a copy of the demo, sent it to Robbie Robertson, who was exec producing the soundtrack record, and it was his idea to reach out to Babyface and Eric Clapton to get them to do that song. So in the fall of, or November of '96, we're told it's nominated for 3 Grammys, and one of them is Song of the Year for the writers. And then we go to New York in February, and all 3 things it was nominated for, it won.
Yeah.
So,
it's incredible. And so again, and this is leading up to that moment where it wins these awards. But again, you have another story of, it sounds like a bunch of near misses or a bunch of God kind of putting the pieces of a puzzle together that you have no idea is going on behind the scenes. And how many times, like, do people in general, we have no idea what God is up to or why this is happening or any of the things we're going through.
Yeah.
And when you were just telling that story, if you were watching on camera, you're looking up to the heavens going, okay, God, I thought something was supposed to be happening here.
Exactly. So at the Grammys, I'm sure in my head that we're not winning Song of the Year, but when Clapton won the first one they gave away that night for male pop vocal performance, it was kind of like, whew. At least he'll think kindly of us. And we never spoken to him and didn't plan on getting to meet him. And then 45 minutes later, we're on stage with the Song of the Year. And I remember Wayne sticking his elbow in my ribs going, are you going to talk? You know, you go first. And I had nothing written down, nothing prepared. I didn't think about anything that I would say. But I walked straight up to the mic, and the first thing out of my mouth was, I said, first of all, my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, he is strong, weak in no way. And then I made a few small thank yous, and the other 2 gentlemen made theirs, and we all went away. And then Clapton and Babyface won Record of the Year later. We went to some after parties. Clapton came and found us. He came and found us, and got to visit with him for about 10 minutes, made our picture with him, and then he vanished. And we've not seen him since, other than just there he is on stage, you know, at this show or whatever. I talked to him on the phone once since then. But back to New York that night, we're, you know, celebrating, and we went to 2 after parties, went back to the hotel, and to this day, I'm not sure how people knew how to call me at the Parker Meridian in New York City, but I was getting calls from people here in Nashville. That thing you said. People thank God, but they don't say that. And this went on for a while. And I remember finally when that calmed down, I was trying to finally go to sleep in the middle of the night. And I remember raising straight back up. And I had this conversation. Oh, you did want me to have this platform again to share this message. Now, I thought it was Dogs of Peace, riding the gospel bus, going and speaking to people, and how many miles on the bus or years would it have taken me to say what I got to say in 5 seconds to 1.5 billion people on TV that night around the world. And so that's one of those things that you just, when that happens to you, you learn to sit back and go more patient about, you know, I thought the answer was going to be yes, but it's no. How long before I know the reason why? Or maybe I won't know in this lifetime, but it makes it easier to be patient and trust when you've seen that at work. And, you know, now I saw Tony Brown the other night. When I see him, don't think I'm not reminded of that verse you just read. Yeah. You know, my steps being ordered and crossing paths with that guy. And I look at him and I want to go grab him and put him on my shoulder and run him around the room going, this guy, do you know what he did? You know, and so that there's just it makes it easier to trust, and of course, trusting makes life easier too. I'm not sure which one needs to come first, but they both go hand in hand.
What my mind goes to when you tell that story is, all throughout the Old Testament and Scriptures, God is always reminding the Jews of what He has done for them in the past, the good things He's done. He's delivered them through the wilderness. He parted the Red Sea, and He did all these things. And He's always calling us to reminders of how He's been faithful before, which means He'll be faithful again. And when you hear stories like that, I know in my personal life, I've had times in my leadership at the church where we've gone through some difficult seasons. And there was one in particular that was really hard that I just even thought on a personal level as a pastor, I didn't know if I was going to make it through or if I was going to continue on in ministry. Oh. And I remember just having that thought of just going, this is it. God, I felt like you called me to this. Why would you call me to something to just have it crumble? Yeah. And through that, I looked back and I see the lessons the Lord was teaching me in those moments. And then even in looking back, I go, okay, so if He pulled me through that, and I had no control over some things. I mean, God was the one who was orchestrating some pieces. And if God pulled me through a difficult time there, or a time when I had no idea what was going on, and He was faithful, then I can trust going forward that He's the one who's got this, who I can just lean into and just say, Holy Spirit, lead the way. Yeah. And when we share these stories, and you share those kind of stories, or I share those stories, I've just found that people can go, wait a minute. So this guy who's over here in the music industry and he's writing these songs that I know, I mean, he's going through that same kind of stuff that I'm going through. Oh, yeah. Or the pastor who's up there on the stage and at the pulpit, he's delivering God's word, and it looks like he's got everything perfect and put together, but he's going through the same stuff that I'm going through. Right. Those stories become so helpful for people. Yeah. So I love to hear you tell that story.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it's not always that fairy tale ending, like I just mentioned. Like sometimes you may not know in this life, right? Why this? I mean, I have questions that I hope to get answers to beyond. Yeah. But there are some glaring. I mean, obviously, when you can point to somebody who experienced the Red Sea, parting of the Red Sea, that would be a pretty strong sign that God's watching after you. So, and not all of them look like that, is what I'm saying, but.
Well, one of the things I've always preached about that, which I always found so interesting, is they did see the parting of the Red Sea. They were fed manna.
And still griped later.
They still griped later. Yeah. So it's like, one of the messages I recently preached at the church was, what was the one thing that finally made the Pharisees say that Jesus has to die? It's when He raised Lazarus from the dead. They said, we have to kill him. This has to end. Yeah. And you go, wait a minute.
Yeah, we can't have that.
that should be the very thing. I know. That should be the clincher. But I mean, so it just kind of tells you, we just don't know. We don't know what God's up to in certain things. And one of the lines I wrote down here, I was going to ask you about, and just say conversations with God. So it sounds like you've had some pretty serious conversations with God. Do the songs come out of that, or is it a different process?
In songwriting, to me, I mean, a lot of songs, I feel like the writer somewhat can be referred to as the conduit for a message coming from somewhere through and to the listener, the listening audience or the listener. And then there are songs that are like the ones on the Mosaic album where I feel like they came from, and then instead of just going boom, right, straight out, it was stuck right in here. Mm-hmm. And I realized at some point, even to this day, even though that's a 13-year-old record now, that when I listen to that record, there are some songs on there that will absolutely arrest me or destroy me in a way where I feel like I'm being broken down and rebuilt again. I realized that was supposed to have been the hearer of some of those songs, even as the writer of some of those or all of those songs. So. But yeah, I mean, there are some times where you feel like it's, as just, speaking as a writer in the craft of songwriting, sometimes it's a make-believe world, pretend you're in this situation. Like, let's say if I were to try to write a drinking song, I would have to make it up, But there are other songs where I feel like I can write from experience. Or there are songs where somebody's asked me to write something and the subject is like, well, I don't really know what that's like, but I can write about this, but use a language where it makes them think I'm speaking about that. An example of that would be I Will Not Be Broken, that Wayne and Tommy and I wrote at the request of a film company wanting us to write songs or write a song for the DreamWorks film Spirit, the animated movie about the horse. Well, songwriters, you don't write so literal to that movie that if they don't do it, which they didn't, it can't be used for something else. But we wrote that song in a way that it meant something to us, and Bonnie Raitt heard it later and applied it to dedicating it to the Katrina hurricane victims, and it being a healing thing for her, she said, from the stage at the Ryman on a year that she lost her brother and her parents, all in a year's time.
What was the name of that song?
It was called I Will Not Be Broken. And, from a horse's standpoint, a wild horse, I'll not be broken, is, it makes sense. But the film didn't use it, so can that song apply to, yes, so many other things. And so sometimes it's, just knowing how much of something that's real to you to introduce into the process that it can apply to something that's real to you, though it's not real to me.
Yeah.
Just, that's a little bit of a thing that's hard to describe, but that's part of, songwriting, the craft of songwriting is being able to do that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned Mosaic there, and I told you even before we came on here, I want to talk about Mosaic because every time you even mention that album, you just kind of light up a little bit.
Oh, gosh.
I mean, you could just tell that hits different for you than maybe some of these others. And but before we get to that, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. You have some vocals on one of my favorite Whiteheart songs, which is Over Me.
Oh, yeah.
And that you sing at the end of that. And you mentioned that we did a little show. It was your show. We had you come in here at New Hope and do a concert for us. And then you were kind enough to let me kind of do a couple of my own songs. That was a wonderful night.
I loved it. I'll do it again in a heartbeat.
It was so fun. And at the end of the night, we I don't even know if you knew that Mark and Rick were going to be there.
No, I didn't realize they were coming.
Yeah, and then they came up at the end and sang the song, and then I got to sing the high harmony with you. So here's something so funny, and I go back because I have to publicly apologize to you because you're playing the guitar, and it is. We get to the end. Rick sings the lead, and Mark's up there doing harmony, and I get to do the high harmony. Yeah. Okay, and then you get to the end of that song. It is your vote, like on the record. It's you singing the end.
I did all of the vocals.
Okay,
all of them. Okay, on that end part.
So I'm holding the microphone, everybody, and I should be holding it up to your mouth because this is you who's actually singing it, and nobody wants to hear me singing this. And I'm like, I did.
I wanted to hear you sing.
I was like kid in the candy store moment.
Yeah.
And I was like, you should have put your guitar down and slapped me and said, hey, this is
absolutely not. No, the fact that you're even speaking of it like you are right now lets me know that the right thing was done that night. No, I wanted to hear you sing that for sure. Yeah.
Oh, it was so fun.
It's when you sing your own song, that's all right. But when somebody else is singing it back to you, somebody else is singing your song, that's cooler, I think.
Oh man, and you guys did. I wasn't planning on bringing this up, but you did that 30th anniversary Whiteheart Freedom Show here at New Hope, and we're a part of that.
Yeah.
And that Over Me, you guys did something cool. You played its original version, and then you kind of brought back a reprise of it at the very end of the night, where you did like a chorus and a different thing of it. So I kind of get the sense that in your Whiteheart songs, that one kind of hits different for you.
Well, it's one of those songs where I've seen Rick lose it, singing it. At first, there's something so worshipful about that song to all of us, but I've seen him get choked up singing that song, and I feel it too when we're singing that song because I would say that's the most worshipful song that I think I've ever been a part of writing and So yeah, we feel that way strongly about.
Well,
Over
one of
Me.
the things that's amazing, for those who aren't familiar with that song, I would encourage you to go check it out. I mean, you can stream it out anywhere, but the chorus words, "I feel His love pouring down over me, the warm healing waters that set me free." And I think anybody who's going through a moment, I mean,
Yeah.
hearing you say that you've seen Rick get emotional about that, I mean, I can connect with that because
Yeah.
I think there have been moments when I hear those words sung and you go, man,
Yeah.
that hits.
Yep.
So it's powerful. I wanted to bring this up, though, because you played another song that night. First off, you are an amazing storyteller in your shows.
Thank you.
And I love just sitting there and you how you set up the songs that you play and that whole night was great. We had a couple hundred people here in this intimate setting. You're used to playing these huge shows with Garth Brooks on guitar.
It was good to sit down and play for a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to have that setting and I imagine when you just see everybody just there and you got their attention, it's just you and a guitar.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, and you said that to me. You go, man, I would take doing this. I love this so much. And what is it about that?
Well, for one thing, on the stadium shows, I'm invisible. Ain't nobody looking at me. And if they are looking at me, it's with this.
Get out of the way. I want to see Garth.
Yeah, where's Garth? So that's my experience with the audience at a Garth show. No, there's something wonderful to me about, and I would cite the Frampton acoustic tour that I did with him, and it even hit me to the point of what I was witnessing, that I said it on stage one night to the audience. I said, about my friend sitting next to me, I said, you put somebody in a chair for 2 hours, and those shows were 2 hours and 20 minutes. Nobody moved. You put somebody in a chair with just an instrument, a guitar, and a vocal mic and a light on them for 2 hours and 20 minutes. I said, it doesn't take you very long to realize they either got it or they don't. And he's got it. And it was obvious, So there's something about bringing it all down to just the song, too. Gutting it of all the bells and whistles and the production that you might, do in the studio to present, to play on the radio and all that. But when you break it down to just maybe a single instrument, a single voice, and it's the song at that point, right?
Right.
It's either there or it's not. So I just love that when I see somebody that does that well. I've always just been drawn to that. And honestly, my favorite part of the stadium show was when the band walked off the stage and left him on the stage by himself with an acoustic guitar. Because I'm watching a guy with an acoustic guitar and 104,000 people. And again, at that point, you either got it or you don't,
Yeah.
And he does. So I just love it, But I also, it's, as a songwriter, and sitting there with the 200 people with you that night, the way, and Peter and I both grew to look at it this way when we would go do those shows, he didn't want the audiences to be more than 800 to 1,200 people. He did not want to play places where the audience would be bigger because he wanted this intimacy. But we grew to see it as being like, and we would say to the audience, this is a chance for you to hear what this song sounded like the day that the last bit of ink dried on the page in front of us.
Yeah.
And imagine us coming up going, hey, what do you think about this? And then he plays Show Me the Way or whatever. And then that's how you're hearing it, how it sounded the day he wrote it.
Yeah.
Because it was him, So that's a cool thing, to experience that with an audience. And for me to be in the audience with somebody who's a songwriter or performer like Peter or Garth, or gosh, I became a Clapton fan for the Unplugged show. When he did that, that's when I went, oh, wait a second.
Yeah. Well, I think when you listen to a full band project, or not full band, but a project that has all the studio bells and whistles and all those things, you love it for the way it sounds and the project that it is, and you fall in love with the band. But there's something about that storytelling acoustic thing that makes the listener go, you're my best friend.
Yeah.
You just connect on a different level when you have that experience.
Yeah. So something real to you in that setting is truly real because you're not being distracted or hyped by visual aids or the sound of explosive echo drum or whatever it is. If you're being moved, it's really a deep, soulful thing that's happening because it's really just down to the essence of this, what this song is.
Right. Well, and you played a bunch of songs that night, and I love the whole experience. You played "Change the World." And when you play those things, those are that opening riff and the whole thing. Everybody just immediately the song and all that. But you played another song that night that was a song Peter Frampton cut, and you told the story behind it. This song, I had never heard it before. "Hummingbird in a Box." That was mesmerizing. I would love for you, I asked you if you wanted to bring some guitars in, and if you wanted to kind of play it and even tell a little of the story behind it. I think that was one that night. I put it on my playlist immediately, and every time it comes on, I have a playlist I call Creative Playlist, which is for me music that kind of opens up the creativity in my mind.
Yeah.
Hummingbird in a Box has one of those licks that does that.
Yeah.
And lyrically and all that, I mean, hey.
Well, and so Peter came up with the riff. He showed me this piece of music one day.
Yeah.
So he was doing that one day. And he had told me a story about his grandfather, who was submariner in both World War I and II, coming back from the Orient with this box. And it was very ornate, a chunk of wood, like this big, maybe sitting on the table, it'd be about that tall. And it's got some, image or something I remember him showing me. But when he was 5 years old, his grandfather put that box in front of him and said, "Open it." And he's looking at this thing that has no hinges or apparent, any kind of anything to, and he didn't even know where to begin, So he said, "I can't." He said he called his grandfather Bandad. So he said, "I can't do it. You show me how." So his grandfather would pull some part of the box out and then slide this piece of veneer this way, and the whole thing starts unraveling like a puzzle to the point of where you open it up, and down in the bottom is a little drawer that you open, and there's a little stuffed hummingbird thing down in the bottom of this box. So Peter, when we would do this song in front of an audience, would say he really felt like this was the first life lesson from his grandfather, that if you make the right moves, good things happen. And as soon as he said that to the audience one night, I remember thinking, I'm looking at his hands on the fretboard of a guitar going, boy, is that true? In his case, he makes the right moves. One of my favorite guitarists I've ever seen and heard play guitar. So we would do the song. But the way the song came together was he told me that story, and then he had this piece of music. And then I remember, I think I took it away. It might have been in Cincinnati, perhaps, because that's where he was living at the time, and then did a lyric telling his story in song form, and then got together. And so ultimately, it's the title cut on a 7-song EP called Hummingbird in a Box, which is all music we wrote for the Cincinnati Ballet. They wanted to know if he would do, if he'd be interested in the ballet doing ballet to his music. And he was like, "Oh yeah, you need me to just send you the CDs?" Or no, you don't understand. He said, "We want you to play live." And it's 3 30-minute acts. And, and once he said, "Oh, okay, well, that would be interesting." And and then they said, "Would you be interested in writing new music? Maybe one of the acts be all new music?" And he was like, "Oh yeah, sure." And then he would joke with the audience and say, I hung up the phone and thought, what did I just agree to? And he called me. So we got together, and most of what we did was recorded in his condo down in the Gulch here in town. And then we would go to a studio and augment those things with, a couple of other players and do some things. So Hummingbird in a Box was, you know, from the ballet that we did in Cincinnati.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic song. Is there anything when you hear it or when you play it, you talk about hands and you kind of reference that, what does it mean to you?
first of all, the pure genius that is Peter Frampton and the seemingly unending stream of ideas that flow out of him musically, chordally, melodically. Obviously, writing lyrics for any songwriter is a little more, I need to carve out time and discipline myself to sit down and focus on this. But you hand him a guitar, and it's like zip. Whatever he did just right there, that was it. He's just, that's his. Sometimes I think that's his first language, is playing the guitar. Because we've been in the studio before when he'll say for 2 or 3 days, now what's the vocal part there? What do I sing there? And then you go, can you put a solo on this? And the first thing off his fingertips is the end all. And yes, okay, so when I listen to that song, I'm thankful for my friendship with him, that he's allowed me into that inner sanctum with him to create new music. It's just been a blessing for me. Gosh, we started doing that, I guess, in late 1999. So it's 24 years ago now.
Well, I just remember it really stuck with me in a special way that night. And I think that evening was special just in general with all the songs and things you were playing. And some, I think you played multiple songs off this Mosaic project that you did with Ricky Skaggs a few years ago. And I already mentioned you kind of light up when you talk about it. Is there a song or anything off that project in general that maybe stands above the rest, or do you just kind of view that as a whole?
It's a sit down and listen to the whole album through experience for me. And if I start the 6-minute spontaneous worship that is the end of the record, if it starts, I can't stop it. I have to listen to the whole thing. But I recommend people listen to the entire record in one sitting if they can. Back like what we used to do when we were kids.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we would listen to a whole record. And that was one of the things that was great about the turntable was it wasn't so easy just to listen to 10 seconds of that, 10 seconds of that, 10 seconds of that, because you're physically moving a needle,
right?
And finding that groove and all this stuff. So, but yeah, I mean, there are some songs that I feel like are more comfortable to perform than others. There's some things on the album where if I start to do it, I feel like, gosh, it's a little too raw in a version of me doing it by myself. What should I do during the string solo? And some of those questions will pop into my head. But then there are some that are just like they're very easy and easier to perform solo. Yeah. So I end up doing those more often. But the whole album, though.
Yeah. Well, I would encourage people to go check it out. Ricky Skaggs. The album's called Mosaic, and I was hoping to just kind of run through a couple of these, and I have my favorites off that project. I'm sure you have your own favorites. So I wrote them down here. Okay. And so you get to hear me fanboy out just a little bit.
Good.
And because the opening track Mosaic.
Yeah.
Right. And I just wrote on here. It to me anyway. When I listen to it, it's all about wanting to make your mark on the world, but seeing how God brings it all together.
You want to hear the teaser for that then?
Yeah, come on.
Okay, so this will cause somebody to want to go listen to that song.
Okay.
I went to school from 3rd grade through 12th grade with a young man named Chris Bonds who had muscular dystrophy. And after he was the most remarkable human being, and this president of the student body at our senior year at Brentwood Academy. He sang, when we would do the shows on stage at school. I remember him singing the Ronnie Millsap song, "What a Difference You Made in My Life." Mm-hmm. He was singing it as a gospel song. And I remember when he told me that, I was stunned, because here's this guy that's got muscular dystrophy singing to God. Well, then his mother handed me a poem that he had written after his funeral. He lived to be 28. And I think his family had been prepared for him to live to be 15. They were told maybe 15, something like that, but he lived to be 28. After he was gone, after the funeral, his mom handed me a poem that he had written, and it just floored me what this poem said. And it was basically him trying to understand his place, his position, or lack thereof on some levels, I don't know how to say it, but somehow it seems to me that maybe we're stationed where God wants us to be.
Mm-hmm.
And he's already like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for this, that the little place I'm filling is the reason for my birth. And just to do the work I do, he sent me here to earth. And it's just smacking me, bam, in the head, every verse. And he gets into the body of the poem, talking about, like a lot more lofty position with higher things to do, he says, but I come to the conclusion when the envying is stilled, that the post to which God sent me is the post he wanted filled. And he says, so I plod along and struggle and hope when day is through that I'm really necessary to the things God wants to do. And there isn't any service I can give which I should scorn, for it may be the very reason God allowed me to be born.
Yeah.
So, sheesh.
So good.
You know what? I said that poem to a church audience one night on a Wednesday night. They had invited me to come play. And I go and give the Chris Bonds Award at the football banquet at Brentwood Academy every few years or every couple of years or something, just because I always want, first of all, whoever is receiving this to know who he was, so they know why this is special that they're getting this. Yeah. And then to make sure the parents know and the coaches know, because they're not 30-something years, 40-something years, 50-something years later giving an award, they don't know why, and who this guy was and what was so special about him, and he was very special. So I go and do that, but I lost it one night at the church when I was saying that poem. I'm not talking about just a little bit. I lost it.
Couldn't speak anymore.
Like inside, I was wanting to flee the room. That was the first thing that was crossed my mind, was to get up and run out, And I was telling a pastor friend of mine the following week, a friend of mine named Phil Bennett. I told him, I said, man, I don't know what happened to me the other night. What? I told him what happened, and I said, yeah, I don't know what happened. He goes, oh, I know what happened. I said, well, enlighten me. He said, in that moment, God was allowing you to see his heart for Chris Bonds. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. Why do we get emotional, about something like that? That did you see the young man they did the story on at the Kentucky Derby this past weekend?
No, I did not.
It's another one of those where this young man was born with some rare disease, and so his family was told he might be 2 years old, and he's 17 now. And for a Make-A-Wish thing, wanted to go see a racehorse. So they went to some farm where there was like 40-something horses, and this one horse walked over to this kid in a chair and put his head down in his lap.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go look this up
So
now.
they named the horse Cody's Wish.
Wow.
And he ran in one of the preliminary races before the Kentucky Derby this past weekend and won. But that kid was there. But they were telling us the story is on, you can see it on YouTube, NBC, Cody's Wish.
Cody's Wish.
So, but when I see those things, and it destroys me, and I remember what Phil told me about, you're seeing God's heart or experiencing God's heart for that person. Because, this breaks God's heart.
Yeah.
So anyway, but that's what the Mosaic song is about. I had thought about for years, maybe trying to put it to music, and then I thought, I can't ask Chris if that's okay with him. And his work is his work, and it should stand alone and remain. This was Chris Bonds' poem. And so I ended up doing the Mosaic lyric as this is my version of what he's saying in that message. So, carve my name into a tree, a knife into the bark, trying to make a mark so they remember me. There was nothing in him that wanted to be known or famous or, wanting. But the next verse is wanting to matter. Well, everybody wants to matter, And I hope that beyond his family, which I know they did, and our school and people at our school and the school we went to made him know how much he mattered.
Yeah.
And there's a Chris Bonds award for the football team. And then I just want to keep that alive as long as I am. But that's what prompted that song.
Yeah. And it's a great opener to that whole project, you know. And then the next one that you went to, you actually played at the show that you did here at New Hope was, I just wrote it, You Can't Shake Jesus.
Ooh.
And I was wondering, it's just a straight up gospel message of what Christ has done for us and how Christ pursues us and those things. And I was going to ask if you just wanted to play it and sing it. Would you be able to?
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
We can hear you fine on the microphone and all that fun stuff.
Naked alone, cold cobblestone, they beat him until the blood ran. And they brought him to die on a cross up on high, with spikes through his feet and his hands. Well, you can use him, abuse him, mock and accuse him, and sell him out for 30 pieces. Betray him, slay him, do the devil's mayhem, but you can't shake Jesus. Crown of thorns on his brow, his eyes on the crowd, all of God's daughters and sons. They're spitting on him, cursing at him. Forgive them for what they have done. Well, you can use him, abuse him, mock and accuse him, sell him out for 30 pieces. Betray him, slay him, do the devil's mayhem, but you can't shake Jesus. Well, I've had my bouts, questions and doubts. You know there are those who deceive. I've tried to resist, escape and dismiss, but there's one who's shadowing me. And I can lose my religion and break with tradition, and say I'll hold out till hell freezes. And I can test him, try him, I just can't deny him. No, I can't shake Jesus. No, I can't shake Jesus.
There you go. I'm your
All right.
clapping audience right there.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that is awesome. So let me ask you this. Would you get the opening lick like that? Mm-hmm. Does Can't Shake Jesus lyrically come first, or does that lick come first?
It's funny you should ask, because I was writing with Phil Madeira one day, and we were finishing a song that we'd started. And we were done, because we'd already started the song, and we were done on this particular morning at about 11 a.m. And I said, well, do you want to call it a day, or would you like to go to lunch? He goes, man, why don't we go to lunch and come back and write another tune, you know? So I said, okay. So we went and had lunch, came back, and I've got in my ear an MP3 player, and I'm just rifling through different ideas because I store them in my phone, and I don't remember if it was I might have had an MP3 player recorder that I had in my ear, and he's just sitting over there talking, you know. So I've got his voice going in this ear, and I've got my MP3 player rifling through ideas on this side. Mm-hmm. Well, he gets to talking about somebody he knows that had walked away from their faith because of somebody else maybe using faith as sort of a weapon in their life. And so they just, you know, got fed up with it. And at some point, and he's telling me this, they walked away from their faith. And as I find that in my MP3 player, he said, but they just ultimately couldn't shake Jesus. As I'm listening to, I've got that in this ear, and he says that phrase in this ear, and I went, I know what we're doing next.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also prompted because I knew that we needed songs for the Ricky Skaggs Mosaic record, and I said, would you like to write this idea for, that project? And so that's how we started that song.
Yeah, that's great. And that was a song even that evening. And those who hadn't even heard it before from the church, when you play it, just lyrically, just speaks to the heart of a lot of people.
Yeah.
And again, if we even go back to the beginning of this podcast, when we talk about God kind of ordaining moments, and you got the MP3 player and you got the lyric right here. I mean, it's like, come on.
All you have to do is just kind of be listening.
Yeah.
It's there. It's all around us, and evidence is all around us, and he's communicating with us all the time. It's there, so you just have to be paying attention.
Yeah. Well, 2 more songs on that. Just going to mention, because we're about at the end of our time here, but I wanted to tell you that there's a song on that Mosaic project called "Picture."
Oh, yeah.
And the lyrics in the chorus would say, "Don't you feel so small?
Yeah.
God doesn't see you that way at all." And this past Sunday, so by the time this streams, it's going to be, we're shooting this in May, but I did a message at the church where I talked about Psalm 8, where we're going through the book of Job right now. And one of the lessons, or one of the discussions between the friends and Job, was a friend was telling Job, God doesn't care about us. We're just sinful, messed up people. Even if we do good, it doesn't matter to God, and it doesn't. And one of the things I brought out was Psalm 8. In Psalm 8, when it's talking about the hugeness of God. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? And the Son of Man that you cared for him. And just bringing this idea out that even in the vastness and the massiveness of creation, God is mindful. God cares. Don't you feel so small?
Yeah.
God doesn't see you that way at all.
It's sort of popular to refer to ourselves as being these infinitesimal grains of sand, insignificant. When I stand beside the ocean, I realize how nothing I am, and small, and stand by the mountain, and then you go, and I heard that all my life, and maybe joined in that chorus at a time or two. Oh yeah, if you go to the Grand Canyon, and there was a movie about it, everybody went to the Grand Canyon to realize how insignificant they are. Compared to this, I am nothing. But God would say, you're the biggest thing in that picture, no matter what you're standing beside. So that was Mark Gersmel, former Whiteheart compadre.
Yeah.
And I love that guy, and any excuse to get together with him it's always going to result in either the most wonderful visit, or in this case, we wrote a song that sort of addressed that thought. I just said, what do you think about this idea, that don't let people get away with saying, when I stand by the ocean, I realize how insignificant I am. I'm like,
yeah.
That's
well,
not
one
true.
of the things I brought out in the message that I was doing is when you have that mindset, it leads us to say things like this. Well, I'm not going to pray for that. God doesn't care about that. He has bigger fish to fry, or that's not that big a deal. And we start to minimize how God views us,
right?
And whatever. So that just resonates to me so much, and I think you guys really captured that, in that song. So it's really cool.
Yeah, no, that ended up being the first song that was written for the Mosaic record, even though we wrote it in 2006. And we didn't know there was a Mosaic record coming.
So it came 7 years later? Is that, you said 2013?
2010 was when we did the album.
Okay.
13 years ago, yeah.
Wow, man.
Yeah.
Okay, so last one, and we're going to wrap this up. And I'm bringing this one up just because I think it's one of the most clever titles of a song and lyrics is Return to Sender. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, kind of where that idea came from was, and somewhat, it's almost would attribute it to my sense of humor, and can be a little bit of a smart aleck at times or something. But Tommy Sims and I were working, doing a thing in Washington, D.C. for a room full of people that the Nashville Convention and Visitors Corporation put us before, to say, here's a Nashville experience, songwriters are telling stories, playing songs. play the Clapton song. We're trying to get these people to come bring their convention business to Nashville. And we did a bunch of those for Butch Spirit and NCV. B. It was the B at first. The Bureau, now they just call it the Nashville Convention and Visitors Corporation. Anyway, that's the business. So we're taking care of the business of this. No, right. So we were just standing around waiting for our cue to go out and play for this audience of people. It was in a restaurant. I remember that. And Tommy, we were just sitting there making conversation, and he goes, "GK," he said, "did your dad play on Return to Sender by Elvis?" I said, "No, he played on Good Luck Charm and the Kissin' Cousins soundtrack." And he goes, "He didn't play on Return to Sender?" I said, "No, but I want that on my tombstone." And we laughed, And then, of course, later I went, "Wait a minute." You know what? That's something you could put on somebody's tombstone, So when, fast forward to working on the Mosaic record with Ricky, and I was desperately trying to get Ricky to write something with me. And so I wrote the whole lyric for that song and took it to Ricky, and I said, "I think this needs to be the last song on the record." And because, the first song is somebody wanting to matter and where do I fit? Mm-hmm. And then the last song is when I'm done,
Yeah.
How I want to wrap this up and stick the dismount, So I thought about it and wrote the lyric as sort of like writing an epitaph,
Mm-hmm.
and gave the lyric to Ricky. And I said, why don't you try to put some music to this? And about 2 weeks later, he came back and said, "Son, ain't nothing falling out of the sky on this. You just finish it." So I did, but that's how that idea came about, was my dad having played on an Elvis record. And I'll go one step further. When I was a little kid, 5, 6 years old, we had a jukebox in the basement that played 45s. It was the Seaberg 100. And my dad showed me how to find the toggle switch and turn it on, and the lights would come on. And you just push A6 or whatever the combination to play the records in there. And so there were these records that I grew up listening to just from playing the jukebox when I was 5 and 6 years old. Now, fast forward again, we're mastering the record with Andrew down at Georgetown Mastering, and we bring in Return to Sender. And that's the... And he's listening to that. Andrew Mendelson is listening to that, and he goes, "It's just a slowed down version of Willie and the Hand Jive." And I went, that was an instrumental record that my dad did on the juke, and it was on the jukebox when I was a kid, and it'd be more like...
Yeah.
So that song had parts figure into it that I was hearing when I was 6.
Yeah.
And so it's all those series of one steps, that at some point you look back and you go, when Andrew said that, I was kind of like, well,
you're right.
No wonder, no
right.
wonder. So, but yeah, so those are kind of 2 parts of the recipe for Return to Sender.
Well, it brings the album, at least the songs portion of it, because you have the spontaneous, the worship that happens after that, right?
Yeah.
But at least from that perspective, or that context at least, Return to Sender brings it to a great end. And it, honestly, it makes me kind of laugh a little bit in the car, because it's just such a funny, true thought.
Yeah.
The Lord sends me here into this world. I live the life to glorify Him. And then when it's all said and done, Return to Sender.
Yeah, and I mean, and it says, he wants to send us to all the corners of the world too, so we're being sent.
Mm-hmm.
So the language, it worked for me because of that too. And, I don't feel like I'm any kind of special delivery from God and God's gift to anybody, but I do think that we're all sent and get sent to go and do things. So it made sense to me,
Yeah. Well, I can tell you what, as we bring this to a close, the music that God has given you and in your songs and the things that you have done, if you ever have moments when you feel like you haven't made a difference, I can tell you, I'm sitting here today as a guy who the things you've written has impacted me, and you probably never thought that maybe you were writing songs and one day there's a guy like, me or anybody else who would be a pastor or whoever. And the Lord has used you in my life and through your music. And so thank you. But even more, the fact that you and I have had a chance to sit down on a couple of occasions, even over lunch or whatever, just talk. You're an even better person in person. So thank you for who you are.
Listen, the fact that a pastor of a church, and this one in particular, says that anything that I've ever done has mattered and gone into something that inspired or just brought you joy. That means so much to me. I can't thank you enough for saying that. Thank you. And thanks for having me here today.
Man, it was a blast. I hope you enjoyed it.
Of
I know
course.
people listening, I know they enjoyed it because this was a great time. And so you're going to be heading off and doing some shows with Garth Brooks at a residency in Vegas and all that fun stuff. But then you also, just to throw it, you said you're working on some new projects and some things.
I'm going to start, we're getting into the writing phase of another Dogs a Piece project, And again, that's not one of those things where I would say it's by any popular demand or anything. It's more of a, the five of us, and I'm including Jeff Balding, John Hammond, Blair Masters, Jimmy Lee Sloas, and myself, that have made those other two records. We've all decided that if the only thing we do with anything new that we come up with and record is just walk it and place it at the altar and hope you're happy with this, you find this pleasing. If that's the only thing we do with it, we're going to do it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be looking forward to it. So thank you for coming on here, Gordon
Thanks, Josh.
Kennedy.
Thank you.
A wonderful guest to have on here. Josh Huisman Podcast streaming every Monday. Join us next week. Click subscribe or follow wherever you're going to be catching this podcast. And we have great guests like Gordon on here all the time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.